Israel is only a small part of this, David, but potentially an important part, maybe, question mark. We still don't know much about where this is going to go, but the idea is that Israel would work with the United States on building up technology so the United States could compete in this space. Obviously, we saw over the course of the Trump administration's final years, U.S. concerns about China's intrusion and China's advancement in 5G, China's ability to dominate that space around the world. 5G is going to be very, very important because, again, what it means is that all of our smartphones and all of our telephones will have much, much, much faster access to the internet, meaning that they'll be able to do things under 5G that they can't do today. And whoever dominates the 5G space will have access to all of those transfers of information. So the United States, worried about China's intrusion, I think wants to be able to compete with China, not only go and beg countries hat in hand not to have the Chinese in those spaces, but to be able to compete with the Chinese, and that seems to be what this is all about.
So Israel has found itself over many years, honestly, in different issues, sort of in the middle between China and the U.S. here. It's just now the latest where Israel's in a difficult spot. We've seen the pressure applied to Israel from the U.S. as recently as with Foreign Minister Lapid in Washington. This is seemingly a big concern of the United States, China's investments here, China's involvement in Israeli communications and business dealings in general.
Yeah, in one sense, David, the issue goes back 20 years to the arms deals between Israel and China that so upset the United States and the George W. Bush administration. But of course, the issue has risen in prominence in the last few years as tensions have risen between the U.S. and China because of China's rise and China's policy. So obviously Israel, as so many U.S. allies have been, now caught between the U.S. and China. And in big picture terms, what does Israel want to do? It wants to do its best to have its cake and eat it too, to both have its strong partnership and its alliance with the United States and do as much business with China as it can get away with. The United States, we saw both under the Trump administration and now continuing into the Biden administration, trying to pull in those reins. Again, not only Israel, not picking Israel out or singling it out, but talking to Israel the way it talks to all American allies and trying to rein it in. So Israel trying to have this balancing act. But I do think we've seen over the last few weeks Israel being increasingly drafted into the anti-China cause, this report being one of those. We had the four-way virtual meeting among the foreign ministers of the U.S., the UAE, India, and China last week during the Indian foreign minister's visit here. The Israeli foreign ministry talking it down, saying this had nothing to do with China, that China wasn't discussed. But you couldn't help but feel that that was in the background. And even if it wasn't immediately part of this meeting, that both the Americans and the Indians would very much, one would think, like to see this become part of their anti-China alliance network going into the future. And again, of course, we've seen this talk, as you mentioned, during Lapid's visit to Washington, and not only then.
Owen, Alterman, thanks for the latest on this subject.